Coverage has begun in South Dakota. Until today, journalists covering the Supreme Court were only allowed to take notes. But from this day forward, electronic journalists now have equal access. The court approved expanded media coverage in July using a specific set of rules. Tape recorders can be used as long as they don't make any noise. 2 still photography cameras are allowed in the courtroom, as are 2 video cameras. Today, the new rules for a new type of coverage were put to the test. KSFY's Brian Allen is live in Pierre with continuing coverage. Brian?
Good evening, Mitch. The High Court heard 3 cases this morning. The first was a challenge of the state's inheritance tax law. The second dealt with a lower court ruling concerning a protection order. And in this morning's third case, a convicted murderer was asking the Supreme Court for a new trial. A Sioux Falls jury convicted Levance Owens in connection with the September '99 death of Marvin Ross.
The level of force involved.
Owens' attorney, Jeff Larson, says Owens was a suspect because he had an argument with his girlfriend the night of the murder. And Larson says the 2 incidents should not be connected.
I don't think that the fact that somebody got in an argument with a living girlfriend over coming home drunk can be equated that means that they would have the premeditated design to affect the death of another human being that they barely know.
Suffice it to say that this was not, as Mr. Larson referred to at trial, your typical whodunit homicide.
State prosecutor Frank Egan says it does matter. Owens told police the argument with his girlfriend made him mad.
When he stated he was in a rage, such language goes to explain his conduct, his state of mind.
And Owens told police he killed Ross. Justice Robert Amundson says the confession is part of the case history.
He said he didn't intend to do it, and it was just something that happened that he doesn't really have a good recollection of, and that there wasn't any intent.
But Owens' attorney says his client confessed under false pretense, claiming the investigator lied to Owens during interrogation.
There are 9 specific things that he says that are out-and-out lies to my client. Not taping, police found her at 5:30 in the morning, he was on film outside Get and Go, there's a witness on the bridge who saw you on the tracks.
Finally, the state would submit that even if it could be...
Prosecutor Gegan says previous court cases have allowed trickery to be used when interviewing a suspect, and he points out Owens wanted to talk to police. Police advised Owens of his rights.
When asked if he was willing to waive those rights, the defendant replied, "I got to talk to you, man."
Now, Owens' attorney says that Levance Owens' escape from the Minnehaha County Jail should not be a factor in his client's guilt or innocence. Jeff Larson also says that several members of the jury pool that heard the case had preconceived notions about Owens' guilt or innocence, placing into question whether the trial should have been held in Sioux Falls at all. We are live in Pierre with photojournalist Dave Houck and engineer Derek Yeager. I'm Brian Allen, Dakota First News.
Tonight at 10, Brian will again join us.
10. Whether or not it was the right decision remains to be seen. History will react to that.
Also,
the South Dakota Supreme Court makes history today. For the first time, cameras are allowed in the courtroom.
Good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining us for Dakota First News. The South Dakota Supreme Court first convened back in 1889. In the 112 years since then, its proceedings have been somewhat closed off to journalists.
Reporters could sit in while cases were argued, but could only take notes. Today, that all changed. That's our top story tonight. Tape recorders, still cameras, and video cameras were rolling as the Supreme Court met for its August session. KSFY's Brian Allen was in Pierre for the history-making day. He joins us live outside the Capitol with more. Hi, Brian.
Hi, Nancy. Good evening, everyone. Yes, the Supreme Court hearing 3 cases on this first day when cameras were allowed in the courtroom. First case dealing with the state's inheritance tax law. The second case dealing with the lower court ruling on a protection order. But it was the third case the court heard today that got the most attention. Attorneys for convicted murderer Levance Owens were asking the High Court for a new trial. A Minnehaha County jury convicted Owens in connection with the death of Marvin Ross, whose body was found east of Sioux Falls in September of 1999. Owens' attorney, Jeff Larson, says the jury was allowed to see and hear questionable evidence. Larson also says police investigators weren't truthful when they questioned Owens.
There are 9 specific things that he says that are out-and-out lies to my client. Not taping, police found her at 5:30 in the morning, he was on film outside Get and Go, there's a witness on the bridge who saw you on the tracks.
Now, a decision on the Owens case will not come for several weeks, possibly even several months. A decision will come soon, though, on what the South Dakota Supreme Court justices think of cameras in the courtroom. Early reaction is positive, but somewhat cautious.
And a lot of people put a lot of work into trying.
The outgoing Chief Justice of the Supreme Court is putting reporters on notice. If you're going to cover our proceedings, you'd better get it right.
We're just going to have to assume that you media folks are going to responsibly report what happened and use it in the appropriate context.
Mr. Wilbur sort of issued you a challenge.
There was a lot of anxiety about this day, maybe more so among the media than the judges and the attorneys. Justice David Gilbertson was curious, but not concerned.
I thought it went very well. Nobody seemed to have a problem as far as the attorneys. They did an excellent job, I thought. From my personal perspective, I hardly noticed the cameras were there.
And while the dust hasn't settled on this historic day, some are already looking ahead. Circuit Judge Judith Meierhenry sat on the Supreme Court bench Tuesday, filling in for retiring Chief Justice Miller. She wants cameras in her courtroom. She says it's important.
In this media age where people can dial up things on the internet and watch them, I think it would be a very positive thing, and it would give more people access to the courts.
And Chief Justice Miller, he's thinking along the same lines.
My hope is that someday all of these proceedings will be like North Dakota, where they're all broadcast gavel to gavel over the internet or over public TV or something such as that.
Consistent with that, I think we called 5 witnesses.
And while this was the first TV test for the Supreme Court, one justice is already showing his savvy, urging caution in this new endeavor.
You can't put everything on, so that sometimes there can just be, let's say, a 15-second or 30-second cut. And I don't know how that's educational, because as you've noticed, most of the questions and answers take a lot more time than that.
What would be the relief? And if you said there would be none, he could do that, right?
Yes.
The South Dakota Supreme Court will hear 2 cases tomorrow. One of those cases deals with a group of state lawmakers. They want the High Court to strike down a portion of the state budget which allows money set aside for state horse racing tracks to be used for other projects. Of course, we will bring you KSFY continuing coverage. Live in Pierre with photojournalist Dave Houck and engineer Derek Yeager, I'm Brian Allen. Dakota.